Well, I read a lot when I was in the cell. When I was out of the cell, I applied myself at the job I was doing. And when I got on that dock, that was fantastic because it was almost like the Navy jobs then. I was splicing ropes for the barge. They had the big line for hook up the barge with, and the eyes were getting worn, and they had nobody there to splice the eye. And I remember in the Navy how to splice eyes. And so I went to the chief, to the captain once, and I said, your rope here is getting, your lines are getting kind of worn. If we get some rough weather here, they might break. You get worn on the edges. And he says, do you know how to do it? I said, sure. It's going to lose about 8 feet of rope, but otherwise I can do it. And he says, go ahead. So I put all new eyes in, and lots of years and years after that. Anyway, I was pumping out the barge from water. We had a barge over fresh water for drinking and the cooking and everything. And nothing on the island was available for living on. You had to import everything, including water, food, the works, to live there. And I operated heavy equipment, the crane, and took it off the barge and put pallets of whatever food came in on the docks, and the forklift driver would pick it up and take it over to the ramp, and we ran it through the x-ray. At this time, at point in time, is when the escapees were getting close to getting out. And I thought, well, now is the time for them to have the tide tables. And I started looking at the buoys out there, when they were moving and when they were sitting idle, to know when the tides were coming in and going out, because we had no watches or nothing like this. But then I seen one time, one of my jobs was to gas up the trucks, the vehicles on the island, as a dock worker, and cleaning out the office, the shop, the dock office, clean waste baskets tossed out and all that stuff. And I went in there one time and I seen this dock guard eating his lunch. He opened up his lunch bucket and took a newspaper out, which was illegal. I didn't know this at the time, but I knew we couldn't have newspapers, and I was surprised to see him with one. Come to find out, he wasn't supposed to have it either. So he read the paper, and I looked at it and I left, and I dumped the basket and left, and then came back later on. And the dock's right in the middle, the office right in the middle of the dock, and the only one that can't see you is the guard tower. He can look down, but you're inside the office. He can't see you, what you're doing in there. And to me, I was in there cleaning the office up. I could get in the office, open his lunch bucket, which was up on the shelf then. The food was all gone, but the newspaper was still there. So I could take the paper out and open it. It was a San Francisco Chronicle. And I could open up to the tide tables, open up tide tub, and jot down when they were coming in, when they were going out for the day, and take them up to the Anglins and give it to them on the weekend. Now, the only one I would give it to was Clarence. He was a friend of mine. I didn't trust John, his brother. I didn't even care for John. Alan West, I didn't like at all. And Frank Morris and I were arguing all the time. If he come up with a plot, if he didn't have the idea, it wasn't worth a shit. No matter what I told him, if he didn't think of it, he wasn't going to do it. And there was lots of stuff I could tell him about the tides and stuff, but he wouldn't listen to me. If he didn't have the idea, it wasn't worth writing down. So when he got this raft being made, he told me about the raft. And I said, how do you know you haven't been able to test it? You're making it above the cell block. And you're doing all the gluing and sewing and everything. And the only time it's going to be tested is when you throw it in the water and jump on it to go away. Now, how do you know it's going to hold air? It's going to leak. There's no way to test it until you do this. So you're going to die. There's no two ways about it. When that raft hits the cold water, that seal is going to be bouncing around with 4 bodies on it, splashing around. The current's going to be tossing around, and water's going to be about 54 degrees or less. And what is it going to do to all these glued seals? If it comes open, you're going to drop it in the water and die. There's no two ways about it. And after about 2 or 3 weeks of this talk on my end, Alan West didn't make it out that night. And I often wondered if it was my talk or if he actually had trouble with his cell, because his cell was open when they checked it out. And he says after they left, he got through and he went up to the roof, but they were gone already. and without anybody being around, he couldn't go, so he came back down and went back to his cell. Now, this may be true. I often wondered if my talk didn't have something to do with it. Anyway, the last tide tables I was able to get was the Friday before they left. Monday morning, when I went down to work, I wasn't able to get anywhere near that office. And Monday night is when they left. And I knew they were going to go because Sunday they were out in the yard saying goodbye to everybody, openly, saying goodbye and wish us luck. We're leaving, and they were out on saying goodbye to everybody. So Monday I wasn't able to get anywhere near the tide tables. So the last table they had was Friday. But the tides don't move that much, just a few minutes per day. So they had a pretty good idea when the tides were coming in and when they were changing and going out. But Morris came up to me out in the yard Sunday and he said, I know you're getting us the tide tables. And I want you to know we appreciate it. But I also want you to know that when we get to the water, we're not waiting for any tide to move to come in or out. We're going to go then. And I said, do you realize what you're saying? 40 minutes might be a main difference between making it and drowning. And he said, no, we're going to go then because I hate to be busted at the water and not go in the water. And I understood what he was saying, but that sure was stupid to me. Anyway, the next morning, that night, I knew they were really Monday night. So I stayed awake for a while, listening for any noise they would make going up through the walls. And if they made a noise, we'd be able to counter it by dropping a tin cup or making noise, covered their noises. Well, everything was pretty quiet all the way up till the lights went on at 9:30. And they left minutes after that. At 10:20, I didn't know this until 50 years later, what time it was. A big thump hit the roof when that cover on that air vent was dropped onto the roof. And I thought, oh, there goes the ball game. They're done. Sure enough, 5 seconds later, the telephone rang in the desk guard, and he answered it. And I found out later, years later, that it was a guard making a report that they hear noises up on the roof. And he said, it's seagulls. Something just, probably a cat or something disturbed the seagulls. And he said, well, another guard called 5 minutes later. It was a guard from the hospital. And he heard footsteps running across the roof. And they were so brainwashed in the fact that once we were locked up at night, after 9:30, lights were out, we were all in our cell, and the count was made, and everything was accurate. They were safe. There was no trouble then until daylight. And in the morning, I had my mirror out, watching the guard counting, and there was 4 guys down in the end of that cell tier that I wanted to watch his reaction when he couldn't get him out of bed. And I was watching his, and he was in there hollering at one, and finally he hollered out at the lieutenant, and he says, I can't get him out of bed. And he says, I'll come down there and get him up. So he went stumping past my cell. I pulled my mirror in and made it like a mouse. And he went up there, and he says, get out of that sack. And I heard him screaming. And he took his hand, and he put it inside the bar, and he slapped it down, open-handed, down, and hit the pillow. And the pillow inflated and popped that head up in the air, and down onto the ground. And he jumped back about 6 feet, never touching the ground. I swear to God, he leaped back about 6 feet, and then he started grabbing for his whistle and blowing it, and that's when everybody in the cell block went nuts, screaming and howling and cheering and making a big racket. You could hear it in San Francisco. And they knew they'd made him out. They made it out. No, they did escape. They got out of their cells in the middle of the night, which is a phenomenal task right there, just all by itself. And they got off the island. We knew that because they were never found. And we know where they lost their boat. And but they never showed up. So in my mind, I know they're dead. But they have never found the bodies. But then Roland Cole left about 15 years before that, and they never found them. And they're only about 100 yards from where these guys left. And they never found their bodies either. But there's downdrafts. And Alvin Karpus was watching Roland Cole when they left, because Doc Barker was watching also. And he was supposed to go, but he put it off. He said, only 2 will go this time. So Roland Cole were going to go. and the rest of the guys were watching. And as Roe came by the under the windows, he had this 5-gallon can for buoyancy, and all of a sudden he got sucked down. And 5 seconds later, the can popped up 15 feet out of the water, but he never did. And a minute later, Cole came by under the window, and he got sucked down. So there's a downdraft from the current, and taking the water out of around the Alcatraz shows where the water would swirl and take up and down. And these guys were never found. The bodies were never found to this day. Now they say, well, there's 3 guys here. One of the bodies had a show. That's bullshit, because that water is not going to show anybody. They'll get stuck in those rocks and they'll be eaten up by crabs before they ever be bloated up and come up. Anyway, I'm sure they're dead. I'd like to say they're gone, but they did escape, but they did not escape alive.